Hey, what's up guys? It's Robert Rule of 2 Review here, and today, Square Enix finally gets a wake-up call. Okay, so this is one of the more fascinating pieces of news I've seen on the internet coming out of the industry over the last week or two. Something oddly relevant to me, and also something that I think is just indicative of both the wrong problems in the industry and the right ways to go about fixing them. It's pretty exciting. So this came from an article I found on IGN today, and it's referring to Square Enix. And basically what's happening with Square Enix is they've basically realized that they've been making a lot of mistakes lately. At least to a degree, they're acknowledging some of the mistakes that they've been making the last couple of years with their last several titles that they've both produced and developed. Published and developed, I should say. And this all comes to light to them, apparently, with the excellent global success, critically and commercially, of Bravely Default. Now, Bravely Default is a game I own. I bought that sucker on launch day. I was very excited. I only barely got to start it. I'm maybe 3 or 4 hours into the game. Then I got distracted by a few other things, sadly. And I cannot wait to get myself back to it. I definitely will. But what I can tell you from the little bit that I played and where I could, gather the scope of the game was going to go is that, yes, it is excellent. It is as good as all of the hype and the reviews and everything you've heard about it really tells you that it is. It's a wonderful game. It looks gorgeous. The combat system's unique. The world and the characters are very endearing. It's an awesome game. So I'm glad the game, A, saw success, and B, has kind of given Square Enix a slap to the face and kind of help expose them to some of the problems. So the nature of this is basically them saying that they realize that how they develop games and the audiences that they develop them for really can make a difference on, of course, how successful a game is, as well as, shocker, how good the game can be. So Square Enix president, whose name is, well, let me see if I can pronounce this right, Yosuke Matsuda, that's pretty straightforward, recently came out about this entire concept. And again, all kind of sparked by Bravely Default and its worldwide success. And what he said is that he basically was acknowledging that the company had lost its focus, quote unquote. And I would have to agree, even though I've still been a fan of a lot of what they've done, obviously their success has been very up and down. They published some great things like Tomb Raider, and they developed some interesting things like the last Hitman game, which apparently did well, but not well enough. Same with Tomb Raider. And so he had a couple of quotes that I thought was pretty interesting. Here's one of them. He says, quote, "If you focus too much on the global aspect, you might lose sight of who you're actually making the game for. For example, if you look back at 2013, we've had some home console games made for a global audience that struggled." And that's basically not what Bravely Default was. That's kind of the good example. Here's another quote that directly relates to that. Here he's talking about Hitman. I don't want to read any of that stuff. So he says, again, quote, "In the past, when we developed console games with a worldwide premise, we lost our focus. And not only did they end up being games that weren't for the Japanese, but they ended up being incomplete titles that weren't even fit for a global audience." So it's an interesting kind of model for game development and for how you choose your demographic that he's talking about there. Basically saying, when they were trying to make a game that would be good for all kinds of audiences across the whole world, I mean, I guess that's ideal because you want any title to be successful everywhere. But his team, that studio, was losing its focus because they didn't know exactly how to focus on one core idea that was just going to work exactly for what it was meant to be for. And those were the games that kind of struggled. But when they did something like, again, Bravely Default, that was really focused on a Japanese audience and Japanese fundamentals of gameplay, and they ended up releasing it wide, it actually ended up doing well because regardless of the demographic it was made for, it was a focused, complete, excellent experience. And I really, really super appreciate that. Like I said, both because Bravely Default is excellent and also because that's exactly how all games should be made. So it's kind of a tough little gray area. You want to make a game successful everywhere. And all across the world in all the different countries and territories, you have different ways of life, different people, different morals and fundamentals and ideals. So it is definitely a true thing that not everything that appeals to one group of people, one country, I should say, is going to appeal to another. Stuff that works in Japan might not work in the UK or the US and vice versa, and that's just the way things are. A good recent example of that is Sonic Boom, which is coming out, I think, this year, is that whole redesigned universe, redesigned facelift for Sonic, gameplay and visually wise. And that is only coming to the West, Western audiences. That is for the US. I don't even know if it's going to come to the UK. That whole redesign is focused on US fundamentals and ideas. It's not meant to come out in Japan, where Sega and Sonic were founded. So it's very interesting to see that happening. But you know what? I bet that's going to turn out to be not only one of the best Sonics ever, but it's probably going to do and sell really, really well. So we'll see if that kind of aids to this topic or not, but it's going to be exciting to see. So when it comes to Square Enix, you know, they've been doing a lot of things right lately. As this article at IGN points out, they've definitely been gaining traction, and their renewed focus over the last several titles and year or so has really been making a difference. You know, Final Fantasy XIV having its relaunch, as they mentioned in this article, was a huge thing. Tomb Raider, which I don't think they developed. I think that was Crystal Dynamics developed it, and Square Enix just published it. Still the right idea. Great game. Obviously loved that game. Sold well and reviewed well. And so that's the right idea too. Not to mention what they're doing with Final Fantasy 15, how they rebranded Versus 13 to become 15 was a brilliant, wonderful move. We also know Kingdom Hearts 3 is coming. And those are games that are going to do well all over the place. They're going to do well in all territories. But Final Fantasy 15 specifically, it's probably going to be one of those games, like most Final Fantasy games, that is still made for and geared towards a Japanese audience. But it's still probably going to do really well in America. And so I just... You know, I don't want to beat the dead horse into the ground. I'm going to wrap this video up already. Pretty short one with this one. But honestly, they're doing the right things. I'm glad Bravely Default, an excellent, wonderful game, was able to kind of spark this, you know, awakening in Square Enix and in the president and in the company and its focus and ideals. That's the right thing. That's what we want to see from good titles and from high-profile developers and studios like Square Enix. You know, it's the kind of thing that we could only hope that Capcom does at some point as well. I love Capcom. I think they have some of the best properties out there, and I want them to start doing the right things and being more successful. I know, we all know they've been struggling the last couple of years. They don't have a lot of money. Their titles have been really not doing all that well. So I really hope that they take note from this and they do the right things as well. You know, any studio I think should have this kind of mindset. So, you know, the bottom line is, if you haven't played Bravely Default, you need to shut this video off and go pick that sucker up right now, because it is that good, obviously. And I think that we can all breathe a sigh of relief, because I think that Square Enix, one of the oldest and most respected and previously successful companies in the industry, is finally realizing what it needs to do to get things right. And that's a really exciting and wonderful thing for all of us. Alrighty, guys. Well, that's all for the Square Enix and Bravely Default news for today. Of course, you can find most of my videos and news videos on freeforgeeks.com, as well as a lot of other great gaming and movie content. You can follow the links below for that and their podcast, the Free For All podcast. You can also head over to the Rule of Two Review Facebook page and Twitter, and please go and like those. I've got links for those things below as well. That helps me out big time. Of course, if you like what I'm doing here and you like the channel Rule of Two Review, then please, you can feel free to subscribe, like, and share the video, and you can share your comments and your thoughts about Square Enix below. Thank you so much, as always, for tuning in, guys, and I will catch you next time.